is our culture nowadays a culture that brings forth beauty? And what types of things do we teach people, and what type of worldviews do we have nowadays? And do those lead to beauty, or do those lead to more ugliness?
I'm here to tell you very, very quickly about how I am absolutely exploding my growth on YouTube. This tool is called Cast Magic. So, all you have to do is input your link to Cast Magic. It will give you a transcript of your entire podcast or YouTube show. It will give you all of the AI content you could ever imagine, including introductions, speaker bios, keywords, titles, timestamps, threads, promotional tweets, blog posts, and much, much more. You even get magic chat where people can treat your podcast like ChatGPT and ask questions about it. There's so much more. Cast Magic, and use code casting30 to get 30% off. Okay, thank you. I hope that was fast. Enjoy the podcast. Wonderful. Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today I am delighted to be joined by Ruben Hanssen, mixed reality specialist, freelance photographer, videographer, or formerly all of these things, and now creator and writer of The Aesthetic City. So Ruben, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Joss.
No problem. So the reason that I got in touch with you was because I saw some of your videos on YouTube, and having spoken to Michael Diamant about sort of classical architecture and architectural principles, and his critiques of modern neoclassical design, or not neoclassical design, of just modern architecture. I've started to look very differently at like how we plan our towns and our cities, and how we choose to design the world around us. So your channel was really fascinating to me. So what first inspired you to create The Aesthetic City?
Thank you. Yeah, so it's kind of a long story how I got to do it. It was kind of a gradual process where I had all these realizations about how we're building and how we can build differently. So first of all, I did the same thing as all the other architects did. I went to architecture school, first to urban planning in Amsterdam. Then I wanted to do a bit more creative work, and then I went to Delft, where you can study like proper architecture. And then you were kind of introduced in the architecture faculty, and you see basically the status quo of architecture. So everybody is doing the same. Everybody's designing modern. And now I know that it's kind of following a certain type of ideology, which is modernist ideology. So you don't really have a choice, and most people don't really think about it. They're never welcomed, or they never see another thing than that, until you see these outliers, these projects where they do design more traditional, where they do design with brick or with stone, or with craftsmanship. And then suddenly you wonder, hey, there's still people doing this, but it's kind of like a hidden world. So for me, I for a long time kind of didn't really take it that serious. I was like, well, it's nice, but it's probably too small scale, and I wasn't really sure. I don't know. I somehow never really thought about it until COVID dropped. I was working for a Dutch engineering firm, and we didn't have a lot of work to do. It was kind of a weird situation, and then I just started finding out online that there were actually a lot of interesting projects out there, and there was a lot of thinkers out there with very interesting thoughts about how you could also build. And I was, hey, this is interesting. So then I kind of gradually started kind of looking for more of that stuff. So I went on, one of the most important things was that I went on like an excursion with INTBOW, which is like an international network of architects and urbanists who do design traditionally. And then you suddenly meet some of the real people who are also designing traditionally, and I found out that they're really friendly, and they're kind of, yeah, my crowd. I discovered. So wow, there's actually a group of really friendly people who just want nicer places for people to live. And you can imagine, like, all the conversations I had that day were just amazing. Um, but we also said, like, hey, we gotta start like a Dutch summer school, which we actually did. We have now the third year coming up. So that was kind of an initiation, and then you start reading more, and then you start to discover all the hypocrisy and all the bullshit and all the lies and all the things that are obviously going wrong, and just the picture of the alternative is becoming like clearer and clearer, that that is actually the way out. Because there is a way out, and a lot of people are not aware that there is one. But still, we have to deal with a lot of the damage of what this modern architecture has done. So that's kind of my process. And then I started a Twitter channel, I started a podcast, and then the YouTube channel, and that one blew up because I think a lot of people are craving for beauty, and they are craving for like a hopeful message that we can still build beautiful stuff.
Mm. Yeah, so you spoke there about the damage that modern architecture has done.
Yeah.
What do you specifically mean when you say that? Like, what sort of damage are we talking about here?
So I think there's two types of damage. I think most of the damage is actually just to the places where we live. So, but it happens in two different ways. One is modernist urban design, which is very, very bad for our city. So it is basically kind of uh, it's based on function zoning. So you put the houses here, you put the offices there, you put the shops there, all separated, connected by road. So you need to hop in your car to go from your home to the shops or from your home to the offices, which leaves like the living areas, the residential areas, very dead. Nothing else is happening there than just people sleeping. Then you have the shops, which are dead at night because, well, there's no one shopping at night. And you have the offices, which are also dead at night, and just then you have all this traffic in between. And in the United States, this has kind of taken the form of like, uh, well, the suburbs and yeah, zoning. And in Europe, we see like these office parks. We see also these big residential suburbs, or these office areas where nothing happens. But we also see one of the worst things is like the housing schemes, kind of the tower in the park concept, where they basically flats with a bit of green around it. The idea was to give people space and green and air, so people would hopefully lead healthier lives, because they were really well, kind of traumatized by the 19th century industrial cities. They wanted people to be more healthy,
Okay.
but then they just demolished all those kind of what they called slums, but which are actually thriving urban fabric, to
Yeah.
replace them with big flats and housing estates. And well, people were put in little boxes to live, with no street where like street life could happen, and just a bit of a park around it. So that's the urban planning, which has been absolutely devastating. And then you have the architecture, which is plain and boring, and it doesn't have the features people naturally thrive with and look for. So you have these very, yeah, ugly facades, and this is kind of the thing that modernist architects really want to put their mark on cities. So if they design a building for like an old city center, they want it to be their statement. So they will design it not to fit the environment, but just to really show off and be different from the environment.
Mm.
And that is what a lot of people hate, because then suddenly you have this concrete block in the middle of like a beautiful medieval city, or this huge tower overshadowing like 3, 4, 5 story blocks with like a very crazy design that really screams for attention. And that is all because of this idealist, this kind of ideology of modernism, that architects have to be innovative, they have to be creative, like their creativity has to like be supreme, it has to rule over everything. So they should not look at the context and adapt to it, but they should do their own thing. And yeah, so yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell, what has caused all this damage, I think.
And I think it's obvious in that whenever people say go to a city that has a lot, like that's maybe like a blend of the two, like London or like maybe Amsterdam to some extent, or there's plenty of European cities that look that are like a blend of the two. It's always the old bit that people take the pictures of. You know? It's never the big office block. They're never like, wow. I mean, people go up the Shard in London, for example. Okay, it's just like it's a striking building, but people go up for the view. They're not like taking as many pictures of the actual thing.
Maybe from a distance. Like that's the thing with skyscrapers, is they do form kind of an interesting skyline. And like when the lights go on, it's nice. But then when you're down the skyscraper, like at the ground floor, kind of, it's a horrible experience. There's nothing nice about it. It's just like a lot of glass and concrete and steel and big. It's often like a gaping wound in the city with it's windy often. You have like it's dead. You only have some people in suits scurrying to their office, but there's no life.
Yeah, I mean, when I lived in Canada for a year, in London, Ontario, and anytime I had to go to Toronto, and anytime I had to go to Toronto, my least favorite part was the skyscraper like district basically that you arrived in whenever you got the bus there. It was so depressing. Like, I don't know, it just felt like dead, like you say. So in counter these design principles now, there's like more and more things starting to pop up that are maybe trying to bring us back to utilizing some of the classical principles that have stood the test of time.
Yeah, exactly.
Whilst like not just being totally regressive, there's modernity within them. So one of the towns that you had pointed out in Holland was, I'm pulled up here. Brandenvoort, that's the one. So what is going on in Brandenvoort? You made a video about it called isn't it This Time Proves We Can Still Build Beautiful Cities? Yeah. And it's a fascinating look at this new built town in the Netherlands. So do you want to tell people a bit about it?
Yeah, sure. So Brandenvoort is kind of a suburb of a city still. It's not necessarily like a completely new town in a sense, but it again, in the other sense, it is as well, because it's a new development outside of a town in the south of Holland, and they started planning this in the 90s. They started building in the late 90s, and it's now just about finished. Like, they still have some stuff to do, but it's a town that kind of mimics a medieval, or not really medieval, like a 17th century Dutch town, with especially with like the structure. So it has like windy streets, but it also has architecture that really refers to the Dutch local vernacular. So it kind of respects the local Dutch history, culture, and also the sensitivities of the people living there. And it's been a big success. It's been almost, I mean, it was Helmond was not really the place where it's nearby. It's not really a very popular place to live. But yet, this project, well, it's sold out. It's almost done, and it's a pretty big project. And it's not in like one of the regions where there's like an insane amount of demand for housing, but still it worked really well. But it looks really charming. It's kind of like a little old town. The point is, it's not as alive because it's still relatively small. Traffic is diverted around the center, so there's not like a lot of people who don't have to be there, don't necessarily come there. But you do have some shops. You have like a little cafeteria. You have some everything that people need. So if you go there on a Thursday evening at 9 o'clock, there won't be a lot of people in the street like in Amsterdam or so. But on a Saturday afternoon, probably when people are free and just walking around, it might be a bit more lively. But still, it's just one of the towns that shows that you can still do this on a large scale, or relatively large scale. And yeah, and this is only one of the projects that's done this.
So, what do you think they've got right here? Like, what was the principle upon which this like project was started? I'm like, why did they decide to do this in the first place?
Yeah, so they wanted to build housing in a lot of parts of the Netherlands because the population was growing and they just needed like a lot of new housing. So that was the reason. But the reason they did this in a different way is because they first tried to hire like a modernist architecture firm. This from what I know. I think they tried to hire Office for Metropolitan Architecture, but they created a plan that was so crazy, so futuristic that people were like, no, we don't want to live here. And that the municipalities are like, okay, this is going to be hard to sell. And the people were also not really in favor of it. So then they went a radically different way and they went to Rob Creer, this Luxembourg urbanist and architect, and said like, okay, can you maybe make a plan? And he made a traditional plan, which was based on actually the Dutch context, and they were like, okay, this works. It was really much more popular, so they adopted it, and yeah, and so that's kind of how it happened. But it's sorry, what was the rest of your question again?
Like, what did they what what are the principles
Oh
that
yeah,
are being applied here that
yeah,
that wouldn't have been applied in said futuristic modernist city?
yeah. So well, of course, uh, actually, a lot of other places they would just kind of not really make a coherent design that would look like a city. That they
Hmm.
would just put like streets in kind of a grid, and then or just very random shapes, like just really top down and just scribble some lines and fun shapes. You have all sorts of similar developments from the same time, which have like the weirdest shapes, and they don't feel like a place. They don't feel like they're just like, oh, hey, there's a row of houses and there's some houses. There's no coherence. There's no kind of they also don't really have an identity. They have architecture that is quite random, and isn't often very liked. And here they were like, okay, we're gonna have this core, which is really like this type of town. It has a clear boundary. It has streets, like clear streets, which are kind of a little bit windy. They put the cars to the back, so you don't have like massive amounts of parking in the front. So also they could make the streets a bit more less wide and a bit more intimate. So you really get this kind of intimate little town feeling, which you have in other towns in Holland. Only it's new, and then you have some outer suburbs which are a bit more, which have a bit more space and have each has their own type of architecture. So they all have their own atmosphere as well, which I think is also really nice. So yeah, the principles are creating streets where people, which are clearly streets in the traditional sense. So not just like cars in front on kind of the suburban street, but real kind of town streets. They have a clear center with all the shops, and it has a clear boundary around it. It has the same height, so there's not suddenly like a tower which is far higher. It's harmonious. So all the architecture is kind of, yeah, it harmonizes with each other. You don't have like suddenly like a glass block that's completely different in there. So I think that those are kind of the principles, and it's affordable, of course. It's not like a lot of other traditional projects where it's sometimes much more expensive. But here they have social housing in the mix, which is of the same quality. But you also have, yeah, just affordable housing for regular families, and still because it's a nice place to live. It sells for, I believe, uh, a little bit higher than regular prices
Hmm.
because it looks so nice.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, people are definitely willing to pay for things like that.
Yeah,
Um, So why do you think that we've gotten away from like more planned cities and sort of planned construction or centrally planned construction, um, as opposed to this like modernist, like, okay, right, well, that building, boom, that's
Yeah,
that. Okay, next slot, like that we've stopped thinking about the place we're creating and started thinking about the building itself and just the
yeah.
building. Why do you think that is, and why do you think that's like frowned upon as an idea?
Um, yeah, so we've moved away from well, actually, we're in an interesting time because we have we're kind of in a postmodern time, you would say, but I would guess we're in a postmodern phase now, where we're going into a more yeah, into a new direction. But so in the '60s, we really radically changed how we built, and then we started doing all this modern stuff on a big scale with like huge post-war housing estates. Um, and that was kind of from the idea that we could engineer society. So we started, yeah. So they tried to kind of steer society by turning cities into a machine for living. So everything, like, okay, so this a street was not anymore a street, like a place to live, but it was just a road from A to B. You know, it was just a traffic corridor. So it was engineered to be a traffic corridor. Um, so at some point so that was, yeah, and that was all kind of inspired by the ideas um, which were developed by people like Le Corbusier. You had the CIAM, the Congrès International Architecture Moderne. So this was this group of architects who said, like, from now on, this is how you build a modern city. And they had this whole charter. I think I believe it was the Charter of Athens, I believe. Anyway, but it was a charter on how you should build cities, and it was based on zoning, you know, so houses here, offices there, um, the light, air, and space, and basically it was kind of it was almost like a cartel of all these architects against the rest of society, because anyone who was more traditional was kind of bullied away. And this happened in universities, this happened in practice. It was like this huge rush of all these architects saying, okay, this is the way now. And they were very successful in kind of slandering the old and pushing it away and taking over the institutes. So they went in the universities, became powerful there. They were actually invited, a lot of the Bauhaus professors from Europe were invited to the most prestigious institutes in America, and there they could just literally bam take over the universities. And in Holland, I know that the last traditional professor was kind of fired or shooed away, or you know, like minimized in the year '69. So that was, well, after the whole social revolution and the kind of the whole hippie thing was going on in those times. But anyway, so that was then kind of the around the '70s. This coup was complete in universities, and yeah, and then it took kind of and the point is, it's still in universities. This is still the leading way of thinking and of designing. But in practice, we saw all these failures of their ideas. So we saw Prout Ego in America, which was this huge social housing project by a Japanese architect, which was a complete failure. Like, it was detonated, I think, like 20 years later or something. We had the same in Holland, this huge, like honeycomb-shaped social housing project with flats of like 10 stories tall. It was huge, and it failed. It was like crime was rampant. It was like the most terrible things, and it's still like one of the more dangerous places of our city. So yeah, that was demolished mostly. Most of those flats don't exist anymore, and they replaced it with like single family housing, and not even like the nice type, but it still works better. So, and then you have like all the Robin Hood estate in the UK. I mean, the UK you have so many examples of where it totally doesn't work. And then you have the banlieues in France where it also doesn't work. And basically everywhere where you try this, it fails. So in urbanism, there was a very soon a realization that people like Jane Jacobs, who were writing in the 50s and who were like fighting these kinds of developments, were actually right. So you saw uh, um, a new way of thinking arising about architecture and urbanism in like the 80s and 90s. And yeah, then kind of modernism was like, okay, well, we cannot with science steer society. So maybe everything is more relative, maybe everything, well, you got postmodernism. Um, but and then actually you got also market forces taking over. And then you saw, for example, in Holland, the Brandenvoort was actually a market development. Partly, of course, it was kind of a cooperation between government and the market. But once the market took over, you saw more traditional architecture being used because they knew it sold better. So this is a very funny thing. But in a lot of places where the government is still involved, like in Austria, for example, you still see a lot of modernist architecture because, well, if the market is not involved and it's kind of social housing, well, then you have this kind of disturbing factor of the government saying, okay, we're going to hire these architects and not those. So kind of the market is always the indicator of what organically would be logical and what kind of would work in practice. So anyway, this is kind of the development. So we let go of those traditional principles because they were literally bullied out and they were kind of excommunicated. Then you had them in power but kind of failing. And now we're in the next stage, I believe, where we see that not only do we see that the urbanism of the modernists doesn't work, but the architecture is also under scrutiny now, and we see a lot of people not being okay with it anymore. Like, hey, this is just too ugly. This hurts us too much. We have to watch this every day when we go to work. We don't want these buildings. And you have the architecture uprising, and you have people like Michal Diamant. You have people like me just pointing this out. Because I believe it's not, you need to both. You need the architecture to be nice and you need the cities also to be nice. And then you have a nice city.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but I think the environment sets the basis for like how a city operates. I mean, yeah. And I think what you talked about as a city being a machine, that's really interesting. Or like that's the design that they're going for, right? Because if a city is a machine, like that explains, okay, so they got it's like they're designing the organs, and that's where they're putting the different places. So like there's the sleep organ, there's the finance organ, there's the like industry organ, and then everything in between is just like the highways, like the blood vessels, the nerve things that arteries. The arteries that like get everything in between, and that's why they're like arranged the way they are. They're like split, so like cities are like just grids because that's the fastest way to get places to go between places, and then the rest of the city sort of just an afterthought. It's like, oh well, there's some space there, I guess you could put some shops there or something, or you have like the shop organ where there's like a big out of town shopping center with a huge car park and like a bunch of different things there, and maybe some like slightly tragic looking restaurants in the car park at the shopping center, and the cinemas there as well, and it's very American, like really American. And, and I never like go into those places. They like, okay, I'll go there for shops because that's where the shops are, but I don't like want to go there for the day and like hang out.
To sit on like a terrace or something and look out over a parking spot. It's terrible. I mean, in the United States you have it's much worse than here in Europe. They have like all the strip malls, and they really demolished most of their city centers in the 70s. Like, imagine taking a bulldozer and just bulldozing basically everything there is to replace it with fast food joints, car parks, big office blocks. That's what I did in the States. And cities that were almost European were turned into car parks. And it's extremely, it's sad. But one thing I wanted to say about the organs, like the machine, it really shows a very primitive way of thinking. So like a road only has one function, which is transmission of people from A to B. And then a living area is only healthy if there's only people living, and you cannot have any workplace or shop, because it will ruin them, and it doesn't fit in that simplistic philosophy. But everything is complex in reality. We live in a like everything is kind of holistic, so everything is connected, everything has interrelation. So we need to design holistically, and that word is just a really beautifully describing of how it works. Is trying to think of everything. So if you go if you want to live somewhere, you want a little convenience store around the corner, and maybe you want like a workplace. You want some workplaces here and there, so you can start a little business if you want to earn a living. And if you do that, then suddenly you get places where people can work and entertain, and maybe you want a nice little square with some cobblestones and a nice fountain in the middle, where you can, and then suddenly you have the square. Oh, that's nice. Then someone can start like a cafe next to it, because people like being near falling water and nice trees and everything. And then suddenly you have a cafe, and then maybe that's the place where people want to start a shop. So it's kind of a very organic, thing, and that's traditional architecture and traditional urbanism. And then, of course, you don't want everything to be so square and boring. You want maybe the buildings to adapt a little bit to the climate, so you don't have like a white box, which maybe looks nice in southern Spain, in Britain, where the rain will make it look like grimy in 1 year.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a complex thinking versus very simplistic thinking, and that also makes it very hard to be an urbanist, because you need to handle all that complexity and still make something that works. And I think the best way of planning is letting go. It's not wanting to control everything, but being wise enough that you know that the city needs some air to breathe, because people are amazing and people will do stuff themselves, often for other people's benefit. So
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. Like, it's almost like a very mechanical view of
yes,
humanity, when you have, it's like, okay, so humans have to sleep, they must eat, they have to shop, they have to work, and tick, 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 tick. Okay, good. Like, it's and
like a clockwork.
Yeah, and the grids and the squares are like, there's nothing in the natural world that like mimics that.
No.
Do you know what I mean?
Nothing.
That's in fact, it's like one of the telltale things when people look for like ancient like sites. They like look for, it's like, was this something that humans built? And you look how like, are there 90-degree like
corners.
straight corners, 90-degree angles, like those things like very rarely like exist in nature. And it's fascinating that that like the hippies generation, right? The ones that were meant to be all taking psychedelics and getting more in touch with human, like their soul and the natural world, and that was their thing. And then that's the same generation that gives us the architecture that's the very antithesis of that.
Although I'm not sure, I think it was the generation before that who really defined it, because those were the people who grew up in the war, who had all these negative associations with perhaps classical architecture and traditional architecture and the old pre-war stuff, and they were like in their 50s, and when they were already kind of distinguished figures, when they could set the debate in the 60s and 70s. I think the generation later would be kind of the postmodernists, perhaps, but still those also grew up in a place where you had all these shiny new buildings, and it was kind of nice and clean in their opinion. But now with millennials and Gen Z, they want experiences. They want kind of a nice place to drink their chai latte, whatever. They like to go to Tuscany. They like to make their pictures on Instagram. So they have a completely different experience of the city. They don't have this idealistic view and, the old is all rubbish. No, they see nicely renovated buildings, which often cost a lot of effort and time from the previous generations, some of the people who did fight for it. And then they say, oh, that's nice. I want that. I want more of that. And I think that's also why the young generation is really, embracing on Instagram our accounts, because they think like, well, out with all this boring rubbish. We don't want to live there.
What would you say? And I know there's probably some people listening thinking, well, it's all very nice. Like maybe you guys just like that kind of architecture. The beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah. Well, happily we have polls and studies, and it seems that around 75 to 80% prefers traditional architecture above modernist architecture. And this happens everywhere, from Sweden to United States to England to wherever we have polling material available. And unfortunately, these polls aren't done often, but we see that people tend to have like a strong be strongly in favor of traditional architecture, which doesn't say we should completely banish modernist architecture. I think for some museums and some things it's amazing, like maybe huge new factories, like the gigafactory of Tesla. You're not going to build it out of brick, I guess, because they probably need to enlarge it in 10 years anyway. So you want something out of plate steel and everything. But there's a use and a place for everything. But that it's only a very tiny minority who likes this. It's kind of the opposite way around. And then beauty is, of course, a tough one. I guess I think beauty is, for to a large extent, perhaps subjective. But I do think there are certainly some objective aspects which make it highly predictable that we like something or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. So I want to talk about some of the other places that you've highlighted on your YouTube show. So one of the ones we spoke about, maybe mentioning, was the city in Guatemala.
Crayola.
Crayola, okay, yeah, okay. Good that you pronounced it and not me, because I definitely wouldn't have got that right. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that? I'm just pulling the video up so people can they're watching on screen while you talk about it.
Crayola is a wonderful place. It was development by a family, and of course, so in Crayola, in Guatemala, you have bigger differences, more extreme differences between rich and poor. You have a small part of the population which is far more wealthy than let's say the majority and the indigenous people. But still, they wanted to create a place which was not only open to a select few, but where everybody could at least come and enjoy the beauty of the space. While the apartments to sell it would be sold to kind of the higher income groups. But this resulted in like a city center, which was designed by Leon Krier, by the way, the younger brother of Rob Krier, who designed Brandenvoort.
Mm-hmm.
And
cool.
To Guatemalan architects, Maria Sanchez and Pedro Godoy, who studied at Notre Dame University in the United States. And they created this place that is really Guatemalan. So they looked at the local architecture instead of just creating something blocky and glass and steel. Like most of Guatemala is nowadays, all the new stuff, it's all kind of like international. It's you don't really see that you're in Guatemala. It could be anywhere. It's very generic. But this really looks like a Guatemalan town. It has actually a church as well. So it's and it's absolutely stunning. It has all these beautiful details. So when you walk around there, you're really like, okay, this is actually a really pleasant place to walk around. And you have all these little, streets. And so this is another place where they prove that it can even be done in, let's say, poorer countries. But of course, if you want to have like social housing for the people who have it hardest in society, in those countries it might not be possible because there's simply not enough. I'm not sure if that would be economic reality, but you do see that the new phases of this plan are getting more and more affordable. But it's also crushing under its own success because the developers saw how well it sold, and they got greedier and greedier, and they want higher and higher buildings. So the newer phases will feel much more cramped and
Mm.
less spacious. Less. You might not see the sky as much as in other places, but
Mm.
so it's so successful that it's that you see that it suffers because of it in the new phases. But the first phase will always be there, and it will not be too cramped. It will only be the surrounding new places.
And then one of the other places that I watched a video on was
Yeah,
in Germany.
yeah,
It was city of Dresden. That's
Dresden.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because they firebombed the crap out of it in World War II and burnt it to the ground.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
like many cities got really, really, bombed to pieces, like in Germany,
yeah.
like Berlin especially.
Oh, absolutely.
But
Yeah,
Dresden was probably one of the worst in terms of like how much was actually just destroyed.
yeah, yeah. One of the worst. Now, Dresden was terrible, and I think Dresden tells kind of a different story. That if you have lost all this stuff, you can still build it back. But also, yeah, is of course was kind of it didn't really have the industry that was really. I think there was some war related industry, but it was firebombed like completely anyway, and also the areas that were not really important to the war, like the city center. So yeah, I guess there was. I think there was a bit of nostalgia in play, like hey, we missed these places and we want them back. And normally I'm not so much of like defending like oh we should build this stuff because of nostalgia, but I do believe that even though nostalgia might be involved here, it's more just the new places they built were so ugly and so terrible that and the alternative is so much better. Like the new the rebuilding what was there, it was such a good urban fabric and with so much beauty that not building it back would kind of be a crime to the civilians there, like a second crime over. And luckily, because there was kind of a Soviet regime there, which meant very little to no development in the city center, they didn't really fully build all the stuff back anymore. So they still had like all these empty fields of grass where they could literally rebuild the stuff because there was nothing else built there. They didn't need to demolish anything. So it was kind of a blank canvas where they could just be part for part reconstruct. But it was not easy because always there is modernist, um, opposition. So
Yeah.
there's always people wanting to say, no, we shouldn't do this. We should reinterpret it for the future. But it was an enormous effort on part of the people who made this rebuilding possible to collect like enormous amounts of signatures to convince the city council, finding developers who wanted to rebuild this, and they actually made it happen, which is just crazy. If you walk around there, you're like, is this new? Like you feel like it's like an old city center, but it's actually all new, and it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, one that in where there's actually something very similar to that is in Warsaw,
Oh yeah, yeah,
where the entire like old town was destroyed, and then the people under communism. This is stunning. The people of Warsaw under communism collected enough money between them to rebuild the entire old town by themselves
yeah, yeah.
while
It's
they
it's
had no money,
yeah.
nothing.
It is absolutely insane how they were able to do that. It's I think that should definitely be a topic of a new video as well, because I mean my hats off, that's impressive, and under communism, I mean, but and it feels really nice. It's really well done. Yeah, so that's indeed it's an insane type of. So yeah, there are a lot of examples of that it can be done even under the hardest circumstances. But in this case, like I think they're quite hardy in Poland. Like, and they were pretty. I think also it was also out of anger towards the Germans that they did this. That they were like, okay, we're not gonna, let this happen to us.
Yeah.
Um, But just imagine if people without money under communism can do this, why can we not do this under a rich capitalist society in a lot of places?
That really is the question. Oh,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's, and I think we are perfectly able to it. It's just a political choice, as it most often is. And we have a lot of laws and regulations which also make it harder. But if we want to, we can build, I think, the most beautiful thing. But the most important thing is, or question is our culture nowadays a culture that brings forth beauty? And what types of things do we teach people, and what type of worldviews do we have nowadays? And do those lead to beauty, or do those lead to more ugliness?
ooh, that's a big
Yeah.
question. I don't know. There's definitely people
Yeah.
seeking beauty in a lot of places. I think
Yeah.
we're just presented with the the stuff that's not, because that has a lot of the money,
Yeah.
because it's, you know, supported by a lot of the institutions who would then consider themselves to be um, yeah,
Yeah.
rejecting the past.
Exactly. It's also like people want to be New York. People want to be forward striving. They want to be. They see themselves as progressive, especially in Holland. Here in the Netherlands, we have a bit of a habit of seeing ourselves as the progressive kind of white knight of the world, trying to uh, yeah, be the best boy of the class and everything. And if we build something that looks traditional, then it doesn't compute in their brains that it can actually be in a way progressive, that it can improve people's lives, and it can be better than just something out of glass and steel. But because they still think in a one-dimensional way, like, oh, glass and steel and concrete is modern, so modern is progressive, so we need to build this and not that.
Mm.
That's kind of the logical structure in their brain. Well, I think maybe what is best for everyone is what people love, and not what people reject, and making places that can be sustained for hundreds of years because people will love them, and not building stuff that will be torn down in 30, 40 years, which we see all the time now.
Yeah.
So all those progressive dreams, I think most of them will be demolished in some time, not only because they're ugly, but because they're not loved, but also because they're built out of reinforced concrete and materials that simply don't last that long.
Mm. What would be like, say someone's listening to this and saying, right, well, this is all lovely, but I'm not I'm not on the planning committee for my local area. Like,
Yeah.
what can people do to try and, I don't know, see
Um,
some of these principles realized in their world?
then I'm just gonna say what Michael Diamant or Michael Diamond always says, which is just do some selectivism. Voice your opinion about new projects wherever you can, and it can just be online. It can just be following architecture uprising accounts like the British Architecture Uprising, or American chapters, or whichever country, because there's now chapters all over the world who are posting content. You can make memes literally to make fun of those projects. You can just write a comment under a video or on a website where they propose something. If you want to take it further, you can go to like a city council and just say like, hey, I don't like this. I think we should build like this. And then use websites like newthread.org, like Michael Diamond's website, or my videos to show, hey, we want this. Just use our work and send it to people who are in charge and say like, hey, we want this. Because if enough people do that, then they will get a signal like, hey, oh, there's something else. And often those people are not even aware that there's another way of doing something. So I think we are with more people than they are, very simply stated. And if everybody who has the same opinion says something to support this, then I think those numbers will be so overwhelming that you will get real traction.
Mm.
Um, Even if you feel powerless, if you're not like a planner or a designer, or I mean, you don't even need to be like just if even if like all if everybody but architects would say we want to build a different architecture, then the architects would not have no choice but to change. You know, let's say, I mean, this is a very silly example, but if all if all lawyers would boycott traditional architecture, for example, or modernist architecture, or just something, and they would not sign contracts because there is it's something. I mean, it's a very simple, silly example. It will never happen, but then basically you cannot perform that type of architecture because the legal system will not do it. Or if all the civil servants will reject to do something, you know, like you get like an uprising within your department. I mean, so just if one group starts rebelling something and it's anonymous, then something cannot happen. But I think it will take a lot of time. There's a lot of ways we can do this, and I think now social media is one of the strongest one. But we do need at some point people really to stand up and do something in politics. In politics, for example, to really change something, because I think bottom up works up to a certain point, and then you need to step up your game.
Yeah. Well, you hear that, keyboard warriors? You can win this with memes. So, Ruben, I really want to thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Links for all the stuff I brought up on screen for people, or for anything we talked about, the aesthetic city, etc., is all in the description below for anyone. Is there anything in particular you want to plug, man?
Well, just my YouTube channel. I think that will be. I mean, most of my content is focused on YouTube now, and I think the videos speak for themselves. So yeah, check that out.
Okay. Wonderful, brilliant. Okay,
wonderful.
Well, thanks very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much, Josh, and yeah, see you next time.
Hey, listeners, real quick, do you ever find yourself sitting watching the stock market like this? Well, now you could instead be ordering my book like this. It's the story of GameStop. You can purchase it with a hoodie, with acknowledgements, or just with the early backers edition. It's all about the GameStop story. It's the real story, not just what you've seen on films. It's exactly what has happened over the last 3.5 years. And with DFE back, I'm finally able to draw a conclusion to my book. Please pre-order it. It really helps me out, and you will get it eventually, I promise. Hopefully this year.